Alright guys, we're back in business with the good mic. Don't have to sound like I'm underwater wearing a mask. Can I say that word now? Is it too soon? Still banned? Anyway, this is something I hypothesized about quite a while back in a video that they probably used sawmills, whether it be wood, stone, whatever, quite a while back into history. And this is one of the technologies that really hasn't changed very much since the basic idea came about. I mean, sure, now we got carbide teeth for sawing wood, diamond tip for sawing stone, but the basic idea hasn't really changed that much. You got a piece of metal with some teeth on it, or we'll get into the sand part of things in a little bit as an abrasive, and it saws back and forth and cuts things. That hasn't changed. It doesn't matter how much electricity, horsepower, water power, wind power you use. It's the same basic principle. All anybody on YouTube ever focuses on with ancient technology or technology period is electricity, when that's just a very small part of the big picture of technology. We've had the capability to make industrial equipment for who knows how long, thousands of years. Things like the leather belt drive was used well into the Industrial Revolution. I go through periods where I get all kinds of these in my news feed for, primitive metal casting, still done to this day in India. If you ever want to know how anything was done in ancient times, just go to India. They're literally casting electric motor casings in one room, the next room over, a guy sitting there with some copper wire wrapping the windings. So the capability of making pretty advanced machinery has been there for a long time. It's just a matter of someone coming up with the ideas to make it better. So, this I'm sure was pretty primitive. It doesn't have to be that advanced. It just has to work. And I can't find the exact reference right now, but I believe it was Herodotus talking about the mausoleum of Halicarnassus and how the stones were cut using sand of different grits, just exactly how we use different grit sandpaper today. The more coarse for cutting, the more fine for polishing. And honestly, the debate on how they cut stone has been done to death on here. What I find more interesting about this is I think it shows the timeline gap. But I do want to say this. The people that built monuments like this don't care how hard of work it is for the laborer out there. They don't care if it takes them all day to cut one stone. And I see a lot of people that have gone into La La Land with all this lost ancient technology. Let me just show you this real quick. It's the same today as it was 1,000 years ago. The people that run these operations don't care how hard it is for the laborer out there. This is modern day India. This is where we get all of the raw materials for our electric vehicles. This is a pit mine, 300 feet deep with thousands of people down there. And you can see they started up there at the top, and you see all the claw marks all the way down, and they're out there with pick and metal rods. I've had people tell me there's no way they could dig a foundation for a cathedral by hand. This is about 1,000 times bigger than the foundation for a cathedral, and this is into solid rock. I'd say worldwide, probably 80% of all stone quarried is quarried with a hammer and chisel. So go tell these guys how it can't be done by hand. But quarry work is and always has been laborer work. They have nothing in common with, say, the sculptor of the Elgin marbles. These are highly trained, highly skilled artists, and always has been. And it doesn't matter if you've got an electric hammer drill or a hammer and chisel. I can give every one of you a hammer drill and all the electronics you want, and you're not going to be able to make that. It's a matter of talent, not technology. But there's big money in YouTube for saying, how'd they do it? This right here, why does anybody assume that they need electricity for this? Okay, it obviously wasn't done with a chisel, but why do we make the huge jump from chisel to modern day machinery? The sawmill carved into this sarcophagus is perfectly capable of making those cut marks. And they're using a water wheel. It's even got the little channel up here. But honestly, anybody that wants to belabor the point, go check out Sacred Geometry Decoded. This guy's got hundreds of videos. His first try, he makes one of those Egyptian looking bowls that are paper thin. You can see the daylight through it. He did that with a copper tube and sand. And yeah, he burnt through a couple holes there. It's his first try. If this is what you do for a living, it's what you do for a living. You know what you're doing. But he's literally got hundreds of videos covering every aspect of the construction process, even tribes today still erecting megalithic tombs in Africa when a king dies. Anyway, I just wanted to drop some reality and some opposing point of view, because that's all there is on YouTube now, is it's got to be ancient lost high technology. And if I sound different all of a sudden, it's because I started the video before working a 60-hour work week, and I'm sitting on the job site now on a Friday evening, wore out, finishing this video. Anyway, as far as stone cutting goes, this one is actually kind of weird, because what was the purpose of this? You know, it looks rounded where you could like use it as a roller with a pin in the middle. And then they took a saw and started cutting it. I mean, maybe they were repurposing it. Anyway, these saw marks here could have definitely been made with a sawmill like is on the sarcophagus. And you see how this cut right here is off and kind of curves some? Well, this machine could make that mark as well. I think a lot of people take our technology today for granted and how far it has came since the inception of each base idea. But there's a lot of engineering that goes into this. They diverted the water and made a chute, and then you have to convert that circular energy into a back and forth motion. So there was probably a setup like this with a piston arm pushing back and forth. And then you've got a big heavy truss pushing down on an iron plate, grinding back and forth on the stone. And it's not the iron that's doing the cutting, it's sand. So in reality, probably the only manual labor you have is someone sprinkling sand over this. Could have been automated as well, but who knows? And if one blade is good, then 4 or 5 blades is better. That's something that it's not going to take very long for you to realize, you know. Now, the metal blades are going to wear out too, so I'm sure they've got some kind of clamping system built into their jig so that they can replace those. So this thing's out here sawing back and forth, some guy sprinkling sand on it every 5 minutes or so, and the end comes loose. One of your blades gets off, and that loose blade starts to wander, and it cuts kind of a circular motion here. And here's the reality of it, is it's too high-tech for mainstream archaeology to accept, and it's too low-tech for YouTube to accept. Trust me, you ain't getting 1 million views over talking about a sawmill, but it's much more likely that these marks were made by a simple machine like this that's actually pretty well high technology. All right, session 3 audio. I'll get this done one of these weeks. But here's the deal, and people get really mad when I point out very basic facts. But at this point, there's probably hundreds of thousands of videos covering this subject, and not one person has come up with a sprocket or a belt or any piece of mechanical equipment from this time frame. And sure, somebody can say, well, they're covering everything up, but that person hasn't studied archaeology in the least little bit, because 99% of all archaeological finds are done by just regular people. It's usually farmers and construction workers. And in this day and age, to not have one single leak from somebody saying, hey, I found this, and posting it on the internet, or to say that they were highly advanced, more advanced than us, and not a single trace of their equipment has survived, it doesn't hold water. It was a great hypothesis back in 2013, but now 10 years later and nobody's come up with any goods, it's not looking very plausible. Sorry. I've seen hundreds of videos on the Great Pyramid being some type of unspecified energy generator. What about the thousands of Nubian pyramids? Are those portable generators? Honestly, I think Peru, you find the most unique stone structures. And these would be top of my list for advanced technology. But I would say that these could have came from the previous world age, the age of Noah and the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's thousands of cultures that remember the Great Flood, which means that they extend back before the Great Flood. So I would say that these structures high up in the mountains of Peru and even the pyramids of Egypt could have possibly come from the previous world age. And they could have been very technologically advanced. But the fact is, I haven't seen any hard evidence that since the time of the ancient Greeks, our whole world age, there has been anything more advanced than we are today, to say the least. And hey, as soon as somebody shows me a 2,000-year-old vulcanized rubber tire or a diamond-tipped saw blade, I'll change my mind and do a video about it instantly, but nobody can show me anything close to that kind of proof. And if that's not the truth, then I want to know what is the truth. And my somewhat educated guess is just a guy who has studied a lot of history outside of YouTube, is that the ancient world was probably right on the verge of the Industrial Revolution when it fell. We have documented artifacts like Heron's engine, which, shows that they realized the power of steam and knew that they could put it to use and made a simplistic motor. And even the pipe organ is attributed all the way back to the 3rd century. And the ancient world was very well connected. In the story of the Jewish revolt, they say that Vespasian was called in from Britain to go to the Middle East. And whether Josephus, the sole source of this information, really lived in 0 AD or not, it's still implying that nobody thought twice about them traversing those distances at that time. Ancient cultures were all connected. You really can't find any reference of humanity before the ship was invented. And what people see in one land, they're going to talk about in another. But after the first person conceives a revolutionary machine like this and other people see it, then, the word travels fast. People will start making copies of this in other areas really fast. But that's not what we see. Mainstream says that these were invented basically at the end of the Dark Ages, when now we've got proof that this dates all the way back to the ancient world. They're saying 3rd century AD. And then there's the Dark Ages and 800 years of a complete blackout of anybody writing anything down. And on the other side of that, in the 1300s, boom, there's 10 to 12,000 mills in the UK alone. Some powered by water, some powered by wind. But does that really make any sense that, after 800 years of basically no technological advancement, then we have water mills and windmills popping up everywhere. We have cannons and handheld cannons and all of these technological advancements. They explain this away with the 12th century Renaissance, to where they went from the Dark Ages to surpassing the ancient world just all of a sudden. Revolutionary new technology is pretty rare, but once it does come along, then you've got hundreds of new minds that look at it and say, okay, well, I can tweak this little bit and make this better. And so it progresses exponentially fast. Anyway, I think this goes as further proof of phantom time being added in, to where what we have for, 0 to 500 AD would actually be the 500 years prior to the catastrophes of the 1300s. And they chalk it up to the Renaissance of the 12th century. And another thing here that I think shows that something drastic happened between the ancient world and our modern world, aside from other obvious things like, the Roman baths are everywhere, so they used to take baths all the time, and then by the 1400s, they didn't. Well, that's because all the aqueducts were damaged and weren't working anymore, so the fresh water supply for cities was gone. But I want to point this out as well, because I've heard this dozens of times. They say that if you're leaving Hierapolis in the ancient world, on both sides of the road, it's lined by both monumental tombs and plain sarcophagi. In my understanding, it was like this in basically every major city. If you're coming into the city, then the rich and important people had huge monuments built to them. And they would bury these people with all kinds of riches and gold and whatnot. And obviously didn't have a problem with thievery at the time. Well, today you can't find any of these tombs. And I've seen this in many documentaries where they say the tomb of so-and-so used to be here. Well, what happened to all those? And I mean, we're talking about every major city of at least the Mediterranean region. and nothing's there today. So we went from a world where they didn't have to hide the tombs. They were right there for everybody to see and never had a problem with grave robbers, evidently. But something happened along the way to where it's a free for all. Just like every one of the Nubian pyramids that are torn halfway down. That's because the burial chamber was right in the middle, and grave robbers tore the thing apart to get to what's inside. And hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm way off, and there was a nuclear fusion reactor inside of here. But before archaeologists, there was just grave robbers, and you don't think that if there was something really cool, really groundbreaking found in there that would obviously make you very rich, that it wouldn't have made it anywhere near the public's eye yet. And like I said, anybody shows me any good evidence, then I'll be the first one to make a video about it. But looking at old stones and saying, I feel like it's this and that, yeah, I'm sorry, it's getting old. And I would think by this point, most people would start catching on to, hey, this is just the same video saying the same thing over and over again because it gets a lot of clicks, you know? Sure, by all means, question the narrative. I have. But when all the answers come back a certain way, you can't just say, well, no, that's not what I wanted to hear. Well, actually, you can. I see it all the time, but it doesn't make it true. And, you know, that's part of the demoralization process that Yuri Bezmenov was talking about, to where the whole plan is to get people to where it doesn't matter how much evidence you put in front of them, they just can't accept the truth anymore because they don't know what to believe. And even back in the 80s, he was saying they can't believe how successful it has been, and that now it's Americans doing it to other Americans, and the Kilo G Bravo doesn't even have to do anything anymore because they've already subverted these people, so then they're going to pass it on to others. Anyway, moral of the story is I think that the ancient world was probably just right on the verge of the Industrial Revolution, and then a big catastrophe hit and set the world back a few hundred years. It doesn't make sense that England, for example, went from really no history to speak of to all of a sudden 10 to 12,000 mills, which I'm assuming means basically one in every town. They probably just counted the towns from that time, and then jumped straight from that to building big, huge cathedrals. Anyway, that's enough out of me. I got another long week ahead of me, so I'll catch you guys on the next one. Static out.